now that we all took our seats. Well, I will follow the order that we have in our program. So I will start with Professor Ahmet Sinan Türkyılmaz, who is a faculty member at the Hacettepe University Institute of Population Studies. He has been involved in large survey research in different capacities in Turkey on topics ranging from health, mortality, domestic violence, and migration. You have the floor.
I'm focusing on the population trends in Turkey, of course, for the period of Republic. And I'm going to give you a general overview of the basic demographic indicators to show you that how the population size, population structure of Turkey has changed. And further, I'm going to give some basic information on internal and international migration, just to give you an idea of the maybe the effect of migration on the population changes. After the foundation of the Republic, we had our first population census in 1927 with a population of 13 million people, and nowadays we have a population of more than 75 million. Actually, maybe I should also mention about the basic demographic sources in Turkey too, because especially if you like to talk about the migration, we have many limitations on the quality of the reliable data. But we used to have population census till 1927 to 2000. And after that, we have a new population registration system. That means that if people have a citizen ID in the country, then you are in the system. This is not exactly a population census. It's a registration system. But of course, the state believes that they are somehow including every member, and this is a new system. But nowadays, when we talk about population size for the recent years, that means that it's coming from registers. For the previous periods, if we are talking about population sizes, that means we get the information from the censuses. If we look at the change, of course, we have an increasing population in terms of size, but when you look at the population growth rate, we have a decrease. Of course, this doesn't mean that our population size is decreasing. Our population growth rate is decreasing. But still, we have a positive increase in our population. Nowadays, it is around 1.1%. So if you try to put Turkish, this change in the demographic transition, actually, if you also consider this transition in three large periods. Just after the First War, we can consider this period as the first stage of the demographic transition because we both have high fertility and mortality rates. After 50s, first we have observed a decline in the mortality, then also a decline in the fertility also started. But after 80s, both the mortality and fertility levels are still decreasing, and we have nowadays low levels of both. So we can also see this picture from the correct birth rate, correct death rate, and natural growth rate graph. So maybe if you don't consider the Second World War period, we all seen that the both rates, birth and death rates, are decreasing. And we used to have life expectancy at birth around 30 years, 31, 30 years during 1930s. And nowadays, especially for female, we have some figures close to 80 years, 78. And in average, we have around 75 years life expectancy at birth. And also we have a very dramatic decline in fertility too. We used to have some total fertility rates close to 7 children per woman. Nowadays it is somehow very close to replacement level or just below it. And of course we have and we used to have regional differences too. West is traditionally experiencing the lowest fertility and East is the opposite. And there are of course remarkable differences between regions, maybe due to some socioeconomic or hair-related indicators. In this graph, you can also see the change in the life expectancy at birth for Turkey. And as I said, we used to have some figures around 30 years. And nowadays they are closing to 75 on average. And for total fertility, we have dramatic decline, and it is just close to 2.1, which is replacement level. I have also mentioned about the regional differences. Actually, this is some kind of recent data, including the data comes from Demographic and Health Survey, and we have 5 conventional demographic regions. And if you look at West, we already have some levels which is less than replacement level. And we always mention East, which always has some higher fertility, but when you compare the relative decline, we also observe a dramatic decline for the total fertility rate figure of East region too. But if you consider West, South, and Central Turkey, we already have some figures close to replacement level or below replacement level already. Yes. Nowadays we have some low levels of fertility, but we used to have high fertility rates, so that's why we somehow still have young population. And the aging is also on the agenda. And the people talking about the Turkey's aging, but still the proportion of elderly, which is 65 plus, is around 7.5 or 8% for today. But if you look at the number, which is 5.5 million, maybe more than most of the countries in the world. So we have a low percent when you compare with the Western countries. But if you consider the declining fertility, we believe that it will be around 10% during 2023, 2025. And according to projections, it will be about 20% in 2050s, and also amount will close to 20 million people. You can also see the changes in the age structure with the very basic age groups. We always have small percentage of elderly, which is still less than 10%, even for now, today. But if you look at the proportion of children, now it is 1 in 4. So it used to be 42% or 43% in some periods, but nowadays, maybe you can also observe the decline for the remaining years. But please be careful. For the last 5-6 figures are coming from the yearly base registered figure. For the previous figure are censuses which used to be conducted in every 5 years. And for the dependence ratios, as it is expected, the general dependence ratio and the child dependence ratio are declining, and somehow the elderly dependence ratio is increasing in the country, of course, depending on this current age structure. Yes. So this structure is maybe nothing to explain with migration and urbanization, but I like to give some basic information about the migration and urbanization in the country. And the primary pattern for the internal migration was rural to urban till 1950s. Then we start to observe a rapid urbanization, and the very first years it used to have 75% of the population living in rural and villages when the republic was founded, and this percentage is stated for some 20-25 years, and nowadays this proportion is down to around 78%. So the recent pattern for the internal migration become to urban to urban. You can also observe the change in the proportion of the cities and the villages. I need to give some explanation how we call the urban. There are many differences, many different determinations for this rural-urban definition. Turkish Statistics Office is using, if a residence place, a settlement, it has a population of 20,000 and more, then they consider that place as urban. This is just taking care of the population size, nothing else. But you can also observe the changes in the urban and rural within time. And if we look at the direction of the migration, internal migration after 1975, we observe a relative increase in urban to urban, and rural to urban still exist. And maybe you can also consider the recent change in the urban to rural. Maybe the increase in the number of elderly and the retirement period may be preferred in the rural side. This may be the case. And still there's a migration to rural too. And if we look at the proportion of urban, this is Turkey has 81 provinces. And we maybe, I'm not sure, can I show you in the screen? So if you can follow this arrow, this is Istanbul. And this is Ankara, the capital. And these are the three largest cities. And the red means the proportion of urban is the highest. So this is from 2008. If you look at 2013, the number of reds start to increase. This is from today. And we have some projections for the proportion of urban, keeping the same determination. Then, especially in the south side and the western provinces become more maybe orange or red colors. So that means that if you consider this kind of direction of the migration comes through the central or to the seaside areas and the metropolitan areas. So I have already talked about the limitation of the data. So it's really difficult to determine the migration. What is migration? If we are doing some figure from the censuses, that means that you have two options. I'm talking about internal migration. You can just take care of the place of birth, or you can just take care of where were you in the last census, in the previous census. If there's a change, then it's considered as a migration. And with the new population registration system, they are updating the system yearly, and they are looking your place of residence. This is a de jure system, of course. And if the place has changed, then the Turkish state considers this as kind of migration. So this is, of course, a crude definition, but also gives some idea about the people's movement. So Istanbul is number one as receiving and sending city, and followed by Ankara and Izmir, which are also the number 2 and number 3 in terms of the size of the population. And if you look at the net migration rates, which are positive, these are all western regions. We have 12 NUTS regions. NUTS regions are kind of official statistical regions from the Eurostat. And we observe some positive migration to the western side. And if we look at the amount of migration, during this period, 5 million people are replacing. They are changing their provinces, and they are moving some other provinces according to the census information. If we look at new register figures, these are in thousands. If you look at Istanbul, this is 450,000 people coming to Istanbul. And of course, we all see positive numbers. And if you look at the outward migration, then you will see also 329 people also going from Istanbul. So, as I said, this is a very crude number. This is including all turnovers, especially if you consider the eastern part. We are sending some army officers to there. And these people are going there, they're also taking their family. Maybe the wife is working in the health area. and she's also considered as kind of migration. But if you look at the net figures, so we observe the positive numbers, especially in the west side or seaside regions, and we have negative figures for the eastern and the north place, especially for also in the central place. This is the very fresh number, and we have another number from the 2007-2008 period. For this period, we have a positive number also for the Mediterranean, for the south region too. But the picture generally is the same. How about numbers? Istanbul, which has a population of more than 13 million, also a number of high number of immigrants and out-migrants too. Close to the total number is about 700, maybe more than 700 people. But we all see that these large cities also have the large numbers, of course. Since this is the number from 2010 to 2011, maybe the proportions or net migration rates maybe give you an idea of the direction of the migration. Tekirdağ is, this province is very close to Bulgarian border, so very west. Antalya, maybe you all know Antalya. This is in the South Mediterranean place, and also kind of center, touristical center, touristical place. Ankara is the capital. And these are mostly the positive net migration rates are from the west, or western places, or metropolitan areas. When you look at the negative figures, you can see mostly central Anatolian or eastern Anatolian provinces. So for the international migration, unfortunately, we do not have reliable figures. We used to only have one question in 2000 census, which is indirect and very limited, but gives at least kind of idea of the proportion of the movement. So there used to be a question asking that how many members of this households who are not in the house now they are in country or abroad. If you consider the people in the abroad as kind of making international migration, so and if you look at the map, you would observe that mostly the movement from the very central Anatolia or central eastern Anatolia. If you look at the numbers, the Tunceli, which is in the central eastern Anatolia, Hatay is in the Syrian border, and this Aksaray, Yozgat, Kırşehir, Nevşehir, these are all central Anatolian provinces, has the highest figure. If you take this figure, it's kind of indirect indicator of international migration. So up to now, this is just kind of a general picture of the Turkish population movement. So nowadays, in the morning session, we already discussed about the effect of fertility and fertility decline. And as a government, the Prime Minister also considers this decline too. I don't know who informed him and who is giving the projections, but he's pushing, and nowadays it used to be indirect population policy, but we believe that nowadays it's becoming a direct population policy. They are trying to arranging the laws and the regulations, and maybe the breastfeeding period and the maternal or parental permissions, but they are really taking care of the projections. So I was already involved in the team which is doing the population projections. I just like to give some idea about the future of Turkish population. So as you already observed, we have a kind of declining fertility, and this figure is nowadays around replacement level. So we consist four scenarios. Which one is just keeping this replacement level to current fertility constant, around 2.1 children. Then in the second scenario, we take care about this trend and the European, we call it European average, which is mostly expected one. So, and then we also take care of one very low one, very high fertility. The lowest one is 1.35, and the highest one is maybe the Prime Minister's dream, 3 children. What happens if Turkey experiences a total fertility rate around 3 children? So these are the scenarios in terms of the trend of total fertility. Actually, we started from 1978, but these figures used to be have some figure 6.7 or around 7 children. And the orange one is the expected one. The green one is the nowadays popular. And if that 3 children things happen in 2050, then Turkey will have a population of around 120 million people. So if we somehow fix our fertility, then the population will be around 100 million people. And if we follow this trend, and which will start to decline after 2040s, then Turkey will never exceed 100 million, also 90 million. And our fertility drops dramatically with the low scenario. Then within the time, in even 40 years, we will only have an increase of 82 million people for the year 2050. Of course, these changes also mean change in the age structure. And if you look at the age structure, maybe the first scenario, which is keeping the displacement level kind of making stable the early ages, then it continues. And of course, with the very high fertility, we have many children. So nowadays, I think 1.3 million children, sorry, not children, births happening in Turkey. And if we have a kind of total fertility around 3 children, there will be 2.3 million births in a year. So then the age and sex structure will change. But this scenario 2 is the most probable one. And if we follow this trend, we will have a picture of age pyramid of this scenario 2 on the right up. So this is a general picture of Turkish population and maybe a future of Turkish population. I thank you for listening.